Welcome to Speaking of Psychology, a bi-weekly podcast from the American Psychological Association. I'm your host, Caitlin Luna. The topic for this episode is psychologically healthy workplaces. We spend a significant portion of our lives at work, and feeling miserable on the job can be detrimental to our mental and physical health and productivity. A work environment that is psychologically healthy is one that focuses on employees' health and well-being and the bottom line. To explain more about what makes a workplace psychologically healthy, our guests for this episode are Dr. David Ballard, who leads APA's Office of Applied Psychology, and Bryce Vian, President and CEO of Autosoft, one of the winners of our 2019 Psychologically Healthy Workplace Awards. Autosoft, based in Northwest Pennsylvania, is an auto dealer management system provider. Welcome, David Ballard and Mr. Vian.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Hey, thanks. Great to be here.
First off, Dr. Ballard, can you explain what it means to be a psychologically healthy workplace?
Sure. Being a psychologically healthy workplace really just means paying attention to employee well-being and organizational performance and working toward the best outcomes possible for all of the people involved. So that means employees, the organization, shareholders or owners of the organization, and even the community that an organization is embedded in. And there's not one single way of doing this. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It really is about taking comprehensive steps to create this kind of healthy and productive environment. And the types of things we see in organizations fall into some general categories: employee involvement, growth and development opportunities, health and safety initiatives, work-life balance and flexibility, employee recognition, and then good, effective two-way communication in an organization. And in an environment like that, where a psychologically healthy workplace is created, it helps employees and the organization thrive.
Yeah, how so?
Well, it creates a supportive environment so that those benefits and perks that come into play help employees be at their best when they're on the job, so that they can manage the competing demands in their lives. They feel recognized and rewarded for their contributions to the organization, and really be engaged in the work that they're contributing to the organization to move it forward and advance its mission.
And do you think by and large organizations understand what it means to be psychologically healthy?
I think increasingly they do, but there's a lot of variability. Some organizations are really far ahead and they've been doing this for years, and others are just starting to get on board. Overall, we've seen employers move from a really narrow focus on physical health to more of a wellness approach, and now increasingly a focus on well-being. So really looking at the whole person in the work environment. So they're not just focusing on health risk reduction and cost savings anymore. They're really looking at the full value that these efforts can contribute to the organization and to the employees who work there. A lot of organizations know it's the right thing to do. They want to take care of employees and create a good environment. Yeah. But employers also get that this is smart business. These are good business decisions. And therefore, the more they understand the importance of it, we have to do a better job of getting out information about how you actually accomplish this. So more employers understand it, but they don't necessarily know how to do it.
And this also helps employees with employee retention. This helps productivity. You know, I think that's one of those things that maybe an employer, do you think they think, okay, if I'm letting people use time to exercise, are they being productive? But research shows that it does help. It does boost productivity. And when people feel connected, right, to people feel like they're supported, they feel more connected to their work.
Yeah, even in that example that you gave, there's research that shows that even when employees take time out of their workday to exercise, they more than make up for that time in the gained productivity throughout the day when they do that. So yeah, overall, these kinds of efforts benefit employees, they benefit the organization. You know, on the employee front, it contributes to higher levels of job satisfaction, better physical and mental health. The morale is better in a workplace, they're more motivated, and they're better able to manage the stress that they face day to day on the job. But on the employer side, there are a lot of benefits as well. So yes, it can help reduce problematic things like absenteeism and turnover, presenteeism, where people are physically on the job, but they're not performing up to their full potential because they're burned out or sick. But more importantly, it improves performance and productivity. It can improve product and service quality, customer service and satisfaction ratings, reduce accidents and injuries. It can help an employer become an employer of choice. And that's really critical, because if you can attract and retain the best quality workers, that gives you a competitive advantage in the marketplace.
And you do interviews in the media all the time about this very topic. And you've said that company culture matters the most. So how do those perks and incentives fit in with the larger culture?
Yeah, that's a very important point, because it's not just about the perks or the benefits or the policies or programs that an employer puts in place. Those values have to get instilled in the actual culture of the organization. I mean, employees are smart. They know when an organization doesn't mean it, and they're putting something in place to squeeze more productivity out of them. And they know when employers don't really care about their well-being. So it has to get embedded in the culture, and the organization has to walk the talk. You can't just say that you care about it and slap some programs in place. The psychosocial work environment is really critical. And this is why psychology is important in the workplace, because those organizational level factors, the way work is designed and carried out in organizations, makes a huge difference. Having supportive supervisors, the level of trust that exists in an organization, whether employees feel valued for their contributions, whether they're positive interpersonal relationships, and civility in the interactions that occur there, and whether employees are engaged in meaningful work where they feel connected to the mission of the organization and they understand their role in helping to advance that.
Why do you think there's been this shift? I mean, what do you think all these wellness programs or perks and things like that? Why do you think it's so important today? Did we see this in the workplace 30, 40 years ago?
Well, a lot of these efforts have existed for a long time, but they had a much narrower focus. So I think it's coming from multiple angles. I think employers are increasingly coming to understand that creating a psychologically healthy workplace is good for employees and is good for business too. I think there's a shift in expectation among workers who are entering the workforce, that they expect to have more flexibility and to juggle the competing things they have in life. They expect to have a job where they feel like they're contributing to something bigger than themselves. And then even in public opinion, a lot more of this is talked about openly. So if an employer is not taking these steps, employees will go elsewhere. They'll go seek out jobs somewhere else that they see as a better work environment.
Yeah. What does APA look for in award winners for the Psychologically Healthy Workplace Awards?
Well, the process for our award evaluation is actually quite rigorous. So it's not just a vanity workplace award where you talk about how great you are in a short essay, and if it sounds nice, we give you an award. As psychologists, we're held to a different standard. So we really want to bring our research to bear and our assessment skills in psychology to evaluate these applicant organizations. So there's a multi-step process that involves collecting qualitative and quantitative information from the organizations. We conduct online employee surveys of the applicants. We hear from employees themselves. And one of the unique things about the program is we actually go out and do site visits. So we tour the facility, we meet with the organization's leaders, and do focus groups with employees, and look for a convergence of data and from all of those sources to identify organizations that are doing this well. So we look for organizations that understand the importance of creating a psychologically healthy workplace and how that connects to employee well-being and the success and performance of the organization. And we look for organizations that are taking steps in all of those major areas I mentioned earlier, employee involvement and growth and development and so on. And we also look for positive outcomes on the employee front and for the organization. So we want to see that this is actually accomplishing something in the organizations. And then finally, we look for an ongoing commitment from organizations that creating a psychologically healthy workplace, it isn't an end state. It's an ongoing process that even companies that are doing great can always work to improve things, and the environment changes. So it's something you have to stay on top of and continue to make strides to make it even better moving forward.
Okay, let's turn over to AutoSoft for a few. Mr. Vian, congratulations. Your company's had a good turnaround story that happened the past few years. Can you talk about what happened?
Sure. Yeah. When I came to AutoSoft full time, because it's a family business, but I stepped out for a while. And when I came back, I had a vision that I wanted to take the company in a new direction because we were building new products and needed to move up market in our industry. And when I came back, I saw a culture that was missing. There wasn't a management style that really fit with how I wanted to run things. And I always had a value in, the mixture of, feeling like there's a purpose in the work and big goals, but also just having some trust and some really excitement about the work that we do. And when I came back, we didn't have that here. We had a lot of people who didn't understand whether they were doing a good job or not. We didn't have, reviews or one-on-ones. So it actually, when I first came back, it took a lot of time to build some trust, because when I started to put in these new programs, even though these were positive programs, the first reaction was just skepticism, and maybe it was something new and it was change. So that's where some of this started off, and it took us years to get to where we are today.
Yeah. How did you get past those trust challenges you just mentioned?
Really just open communications, laying out a plan that they never really understood before, or didn't have a lot of visibility or ownership to before. A lot of the employees, didn't feel like they had the autonomy or the power to make decisions or help make, plans, or put new projects in place, or accomplish new things that would help the company. So it really opened up a lot of trust and two-way communication across the company.
And can you now talk about what your company's culture is like today and what benefits you provide employees? I know that wellness programs are popular with AutoSoft.
Yeah, no, we probably have too many programs in some ways. We do a lot. And, I think it's just, as we saw some of the success out of these programs as we put them in place, I think we're always trying to, look ahead. It's an ever evolving thing, and the business is always changing, and the needs of the people are always changing, and the demographics are changing all the time. So we're always trying to make sure we have the right fit to the right people, the culture, and the business needs, and and what we need out of the business as far as performance goes. And so it's a balance all the time, but we do all kinds of programs, both physical and mental, and just some of the way we interact here, has a lot to do with, having a healthy environment.
Yeah, I want to talk about a couple of specific things you have going on. What's your You've Been Caught initiative?
The You've Been Caught is it's kind of a peer-based program where it really rewards people for giving some recognition to people for making the right choices in their life, whether it be healthy choices. Maybe they brought a healthy lunch, or we're doing well on sticking to their diet, or encouraging others to adopt healthy ways, things like that. So it's almost you could walk by and you could see somebody taking a piece of candy or something and say, you've been caught. And it's just kind of it's like do 10 push-ups, and there's a little bit of a family feel of like hey, we're going to help each other do better.
Mm-hmm. And how is that caught on with your pun intended, with your group?
It's caught on really well. We've actually sort of evolved that program now. We've included, we call it the Token Award program. So it now involves a little wider peer-based program that includes some monetary and gift rewards for achieving goals, personal goals, and things like that. Mm-hmm.
And you also have something called a Take 10 station, which I found interesting, where employees can take a break from their work to de-stress, and they can do fun things like put together a puzzle or color or make a paper airplane. Can you talk about how that's helped your employees during the day?
Yeah, we have these stations throughout the buildings and on the different floors, and really I'll see employees that maybe they're waiting for a meeting to get into a meeting, and they're kind of gathered around one of the tables, and they're kind of chit-chatting and talking to each other, get to know each other, but also at the same time, they're doing a puzzle together, or they're just doing a project together that's kind of relaxing, and sometimes I think it eases their mind a little bit before they go into a meeting that might be a little stressful or a little tense, and helps get them, to relax and get to know each other a little bit.
Yeah, and how does that help with employees just getting to know each other a little in a more of a casual way, not just in a meeting environment or in the hallways, like doing something kind of fun together and definitely totally unrelated to their work?
Yeah, that camaraderie is important. I think there's also the trust factor, just understanding each other and just understanding that we're all working towards the same things as a team. Mm-hmm. And, that comes from interactions that are both in the business and doing the right things in the business together, and treating each other fairly and helping each other. But also outside, we have a lot of programs or, a lot of events that we do outside, even like, happy hours and bowling and different things that we get people together. And they are a diverse group, so we don't always get to work together directly. So when we get outside the office, it gives us a chance to get to know each other and a little bit about our families or what we like, what we don't like, and helps us work better together so we can focus on some strengths and weaknesses.
And when you were going through the change when you took over, did you find that the importance of being transparent and sharing what was going on with your employees was helpful? Because I often know that information helps ease anxiety when people, when you have a restructuring and you have change. What was helpful for you?
I think it was helpful to lay out the plan and the course and how we were going to get to the destination we were headed for. And I think as a privately owned company, small to mid-sized company, we actually share probably more than some of the public companies do with their employees as far as, financial information, financial goals, product goals, departmental and personal goals. We go through a lot of, goal setting exercises, and out of that, comes a lot of the transparency of what we're all trying to get done, and it starts to make sure we're all working together towards the same things, and just builds out a lot of transparency and trust in the company.
And when you mentioned, the previous days to now, you said that there were no annual reviews, and now you even go above and beyond that, and you have monthly reviews. So how has that helped your employees, and what changes have you seen?
Yeah, it's part of that same very open, transparent, communication, and very direct. I mean, I'm personally very direct with people, so I'm not afraid to hold back or tell them what I really think or tell them the truth. And I think some of that from the top down, starts to become part of the culture, or the expectation that, hey, if you feel a certain way or you don't agree with something, or you do, like, being transparent and open is a good thing to have. It helps us, get things done faster and make decisions faster. And I think that, having the one-on-ones, at one point we actually had one-on-ones weekly, and some departments would do, just a quick 20-minute one-on-one with each of their employees, and just to get a feel for how they're doing and how they're feeling, and is this a time to maybe shift some of your work so that you can clear your mind a little bit, or maybe get a little refresh. Sometimes change is good, and then others would do, biweekly or monthly. We're actually evolving that this year. Like I say, I think it's important to constantly evolve things, and I think we're moving to more of a, still a biweekly to monthly one-on-ones, so you get the real-time feedback and very direct.
Yeah.
But we also are moving to maybe once or twice a year, more thorough review, so that we really understand, what we need to work on and where we're doing well.
Right. Do your employees feel empowered to manage up, meaning they feel comfortable providing feedback to their managers or to company leadership?
Not in all cases, to be honest. I think that we have some room to improve there. I think that we need to do better at some of our 360 reviews and some of the openness, in both directions. I think that it just depends on the department or the group of people, the individuals, and the relationship with their managers.
Right. And it's something, as David mentioned, or Dr. Ballard mentioned in the beginning, is the importance of always evolving. So that's something AutoSoft is doing in that regard.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah.
And so you're a smaller company, and obviously we hear often about all the amazing perks a company like Google or Facebook can provide employees. But with a smaller company like yours, what advice do you have for other CEOs in that realm? Because obviously we can always look to these big behemoth examples as like the pinnacle of employee wellness and incentive programs. But obviously we all can't provide those same things for a smaller company like yours. So what advice do you have?
I would say start off small. That's how we started. And a lot of it's really about the employee experience. And you'd be amazed at, things like the open feedback and the little things like company T-shirts or branded T-shirts or little prizes for doing a good job, and some little bit of recognition goes a long way. I'd say just some of the small things to start out. I mean, that's the easiest way to get started, and from there it builds and builds, and you'll kind of figure out where things fit the best and what gives you the most benefit from both the company side and the employee side, and eventually you'll be like us and have lots of programs.
So I want to get both of your opinions on the importance of two things. The first is employee development and pipelines to advancement, and the other is employee recognition. Dr. Ballard, I'll start with you. Overall, how crucial are those two elements to creating a psychologically healthy workplace?
Well, those are two areas that in general, there's a lot of room for improvement. We do surveys of the U.S. workforce every year to look at issues that are top of mind and employee attitudes and experiences on the job. And one of the things we find is only about half of U.S. workers say they're satisfied with the growth and development opportunities that they have available to them on the job. Lack of opportunity for advancement and growth in an organization also year after year is the number 2 top source of stress that U.S. workers cite. So it's something that's getting in the way of their work performance. So there's lots of opportunity to improve there. Similarly, only 58% of U.S. workers say they feel valued by their employer. And that's a striking figure when I think just over half of U.S. workers say they even feel valued for what they're contributing on the job. And from our research, we know that feeling valued is linked to higher levels of job satisfaction, higher levels of motivation, and the likelihood that people are actually going to participate in wellness programs and training activities and involvement initiatives. So it's not just isolated to reward and recognition programs. This spills over into employee performance across the board. So these are big deals for employers.
And so we're talking about recognition. Do you think in some cases recognition is more important than pay?
Recognition in organizations really consists of both monetary and non-monetary forms. It can be formal or informal. So, certainly pay is always an issue. In our surveys, we find that's the number one source of stress is low pay that people cite. But it's one of those issues that when it's insufficient or seen as unfair, it's a huge problem. And all the other perks and award programs and certificates and award ceremonies aren't going to make up for that if people feel like they're unfairly compensated or that it's not enough. But once you reach a certain point, it doesn't add value once people feel like it's sufficient. So those other things really come into play. And it can be a simple thank you from a colleague or a supervisor for a job well done and feeling like your work was actually appreciated. And there's something in the psychology research that is called effort reward imbalance. And so if people feel like what they're putting into their job and their work is out of whack with how they're being recognized and compensated along the way, then that creates additional problems in a workplace.
Yeah, that's very fascinating how it's might not necessarily always be so tied. And so with employee development and pipelines, is that something you're seeing more in the workplace today, that the companies are coming up with these long range plans for people?
People are thinking about it a lot more, certainly. The rate of change is increasing. The environment is changing all the time. And so if organizations want to keep up and be competitive in an increasingly global marketplace and more rapid changes, then they have to prepare their workforce to be able to cope with the stress that they face, to be able to handle change and be resilient. So I think a lot of organizations are thinking ahead and understanding that they need to do this, but there's a lot more work to be done.
And Mr. Vian, turning over to you, how have those two areas helped your company? That's employee development and pipelines and recognition.
Yeah, I think the pipeline is the things that we've done with developing a career pipeline and pathways has really helped us separate those that have potential from those who maybe either aren't best fit for the company or the future of the company, and make decisions on whether or not we can help people maximize their potential in their career here or beyond, or decide that, maybe their career has a better path outside Autosoft. So those are some tough decisions that, some of our managers have to make or help us make. But that's part of the reality of making sure we have the right fit, the right culture, the right people. And as far as the recognition goes, recognition has, I would say, out of the surveys we do internally and all the award programs that we participate in, the recognition is one of the top things that employees respond to and appreciate. They feel valued. They feel like a part of something big, and like their really efforts are well received and appreciated and basically seen by all, including, upper management and myself. And I'd say one of the most difficult things I'm seeing for us as we're evolving and hiring more remote workers is, how do you make the remote workers more of a part of the integral part of the culture and the rest of the people? And how do you give them the recognition as a remote employee and make them feel the same as the people that are here?
Yeah, that's a great point you make, Mr. Vian, about remote employees. So turning over to Dr. Ballard, how do you engage employees when they're not actually working in an office space, if they're working remotely? Yeah,
this is an important area, and one that there's not been a lot of work done. And in fact, in most organizations, managers are still working the same way they did in the Industrial Revolution. Like people are standing in an assembly line cranking out widgets, when that's not most of the work that's getting done nowadays. But unfortunately, most managers are never trained in how to manage a remote workforce. And so that's an area where there's a lot more room for development. Now, there is research being done and there is work happening. Unfortunately, it's not translating yet to a majority of workplaces. But increasingly, we have access to the technology tools that we need to be able to actually involve and include people who may be working in remote locations, teams who aren't necessarily even in the same physical location at all. We have tools that can facilitate that online through video conferencing and chat functions. And so it's a matter of figuring out how to effectively use those tools so that you don't lose the types of interactions that you have in a face-to-face work environment. So there's a lot of work happening in that area. But it's a huge need for most employers. And to this point, most managers still haven't even been trained in how to do that effectively.
And one other question for you, Dr. Ballard. I'm sure many listeners out there have worked someplace that was not psychologically healthy. Can you talk about how damaging that is for morale, and what does that stress do to our mental and physical health?
Yeah, we've all probably worked in an environment where we get up in the morning and we dread going in, and no matter what job you're in, everybody has bad days, but there are a lot of environments, unfortunately, where it's just unpleasant to be in. Your day-to-day experience on the job is bad, and stress is a normal part of life. It's a natural reaction that it's designed to help kick us in gear and deal with whatever challenge or threats in front of us. But the reality is that as humans, we are not designed to withstand that day after day after day. That's supposed to be ramp up, deal with the threat, and then get back to your baseline and go about your business. So when that chronic stress persists, it puts a lot of wear and tear on your body and your brain, and it can start interfering with your physical health, your mental health. It can interfere with interpersonal relationships. Your job performance can suffer. And so if this kind of chronic stress persists from a negative work environment, then it can actually affect people's job performance, so that they not only they don't feel competent on the job, but they're actually not doing their best work. So it's really a shared responsibility between employees and employers to create this environment where people can bring their best to the job, and employers are creating an environment that's conducive to them being engaged and having a positive work experience. And
I imagine the signs of that happening are probably high turnover or low morale, productivity, that sort of thing. Is that the case?
You see on the organizational side, you see higher levels of absenteeism and turnover. You see performance and productivity dropping. You may see more conflict or incivility in a workplace. People disengaging and not really giving it their all. On the business side of things, you might see profitability sliding, output starting to drop, customer service ratings dipping, things that all could be signs that something bigger is going on under the surface.
Yeah, so you want to, I guess I'm sure for a company, they want to address it before it gets to that point, because that's already, you're seeing the effects of people not being happy, not even just happy, but just being miserable on the job.
Yeah, creating this psychologically healthy environment is an overall approach. And if you strive to do that in a general sense, then when things are tough, and the recession was a great example of this, if you've already been doing this, then you're better equipped to handle that, and your employees are too. So even organizations that were very psychologically healthy, who were doing all the right things, the recession hit, and that was an example of these are forces bigger than the organization.
Yeah.
So even good organizations got hit pretty hard, and sometimes had to make cuts or layoffs or change things that weren't necessarily positive. But those who had paid attention to creating a psychologically healthy environment up to that point handled it better. So it's not only what they're doing, it's how they're going about it. So employees in those circumstances felt like they were in it together. The employer was being open and transparent with them, involving them in problem solving about how they were going to cope with it. And in fact, organizations that were really forward thinking at the time used it as an opportunity to position themselves to be even more successful when the economy turned around. So that's a really concrete example. But you don't want to wait until there's a crisis to start addressing some of these issues, because once trust is broken, once there's negativity in the workplace, that's hard to dig out from, and it lasts a long time, and it takes a lot of consistency in the future to make up for that. So it's much, much easier to create it to begin with, and then use that to help you weather the storms.
Yeah, but I guess it's not hopeless if a company or an organization is having that experience where they're like, managers are looking at this, whoa, we've got to make some changes. But you said it takes a long time to.
Yeah, every organization goes through tough times, and there's lots of change happening in organizations. A survey we did a couple years ago, about half the U.S. workforce said they were currently going through major organizational changes or had just gone through them. And that's stressful.
Absolutely.
So times are going to change. There will be ups and downs, but thinking bigger picture about how do we create this healthy environment that's going to support workers, support the business, is going to lead to an environment where everybody can win in the long run.
Do you think this is an exciting time to be an employee? I guess kind of a funny way to say that, but I guess I just mean, like, is it a time where employees feel empowered about the kind of work they're choosing, and they feel like their employers will create better environments for them?
Yeah, I think this is one that it depends a lot on the company. I think in really high-performing organizations that understand this psychologically healthy workplace concept and are taking those kinds of steps, employees do feel like they have a voice. They do feel like they're involved in decisions that affect them on the job. They have sufficient autonomy and control and flexibility in their life that many people didn't have in the past. And so those are great things. But overall in the U.S. workforce, that's not necessarily the case. In our surveys of U.S. workers, although about 2/3 of working Americans said that their organization is open with them and communicates with them regularly, only just over half said the organization actually asks them for feedback regularly. And only about 4 out of 10 say the organization actually listens to their feedback and uses it to make changes. So I think these successful organizations are doing it better and better. But on average in the U.S. workforce, we have a lot of room for growth.
And I want to touch on another survey that your office did. So now we're only a few months from summer, so that means vacation time. So last year, APA issued a work and well-being survey that found that taking time off helped employees recharge, but those benefits faded after only a few days for most people. How can employers make sure that vacation time is actually beneficial? And also, what tips do you have for employees to make sure that recharging feeling lasts beyond a couple days.
Yeah, I'm sure most of us have had the experience where, we take some time off, and whether it's a staycation or whether you go somewhere exciting, you come back to work and there's the mountain of things waiting for you that have piled up while you were away. And so all that relaxation is out the window the second you go in, and you're actually more stressed than you were before you left because you're behind and everything is due, deadlines are waiting, and it's worse than it was before. And you hear people all the time say, this is what I get for taking time off.
Yeah, of course.
And so unfortunately, we know from the research that when that happens, when there's a backlog and people come back to that kind of heavier demand, the bigger that is, the faster those benefits of taking time off fade away. So there's some things that employees and employers can do. And again, this is one of those shared responsibility issues to try to make those last longer. I mean, it's in the best interest of employees and the company to try to make the most gains from people having time off. So on the employee side of things, when they're off, they need to make sure they're getting the adequate stress recovery experiences. And from psychology research, we know to recover from stress and prevent burnout, you need to have time when you're not working, when you're not thinking about work. 'Cause even if you're not at work, but you're getting pinged with messages and you're constantly ruminating about your deadlines coming up when you get back, that prevents you from actually recovering from stress. You need to engage actively in some relaxation activities, whatever that is for you. It may be laying on a beach. It may be reading a book. It may be doing yoga or meditation. Whatever it is that relaxes you, you need to engage in that. You also need to stay connected and involved in some other interesting, challenging activities that aren't work related, something that stimulates you beyond just work. And then finally, you need to get enough good quality sleep. And that's an issue. Sometimes you pack so much into a vacation that you're exhausted when you come back and you say, I need a vacation for my vacation, right? So those are things that during the vacation experience, employees need to do in order to recharge and come back at their best. Now, the shared responsibility piece, and this requires some planning ahead and some work when you get back to the office, and employees need to do this with their teams and with their employers. One is actually plan ahead. So when you know you're going to be out, have a concrete plan. Who's going to handle the things you normally do while you're out of the office? Share your expectations about your availability while you're off. Are you going to check email? If an emergency comes up, should people contact you? That way there's not misunderstanding with people feeling like they don't want to bother you, or knowing that you are going to check it and not feeling like you're on call 24/7 while you're taking that time off. That also helps encouraging teams to schedule vacations in advance so that too many people aren't out right when a big deadline is looming, and that coordination across the work unit's important. Organizations need to develop supervisors as well so that they're tracking employees' vacation time and use of that. They're encouraging and supporting employees in taking that time off so that employees feel like they can actually take time off and it won't be viewed negatively. And then training supervisors to better understand work stress so that they can identify it if they're seeing it in their employees and direct them toward resources or strategies to help manage that stress effectively. Cross-training workers on your team is another great one. So if you have somebody out, there's somebody else who actually has the skill set to be able to pick up that work temporarily while the other person's out. On the back end of vacations, easing back in is really important. And I mentioned coming back to that mountain. If you can ease yourself back into work, so maybe the first day that someone is back, they're working remotely or telecommuting, or maybe they're blocking out time on their schedule to catch up on the hundreds of emails that are piled up. So they don't walk in the door and have 10 people at their office waiting for them and the expectation that they do it all immediately. So try to ease it back in and dig out rather than getting overwhelmed immediately. And then I think the big picture issue is looking at the culture in an organization. So in most companies, you're not going to have somebody actually saying, well, you shouldn't take time off and I'm going to penalize you or look badly on you if you're actually using your vacation time. That doesn't usually happen. But what does happen a lot of times is, what's being communicated indirectly in an organization.
Right.
Are you holding
Subtle
up
hints.
as an example of the perfect employee, the worker who never takes time off, or who responds to emails, at midnight on Saturdays? And if you're saying this is the gold star employee, then indirectly you're communicating to your workforce that it's bad to take time off and that you should be on call 24/7. So even if those are not explicit expectations that are laid out, look at how things are being modeled by leaders, look at what's being reinforced. And if it's reinforcing things that are negative or not what you intend, clarify those expectations and adjust that. So I think those bigger cultural issues are really important too.
So one final question. Where can people go to learn about the Psychologically Healthy Workplace Awards and also about the Office of Applied Psychology?
People can go online to apa.org/applied-psychology, and there's information about the Psychologically Healthy Workplace Awards available there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Ballard and Mr. Vian. It's been a really fascinating conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
If you've been a longtime listener or are new to our podcast, please consider giving us a rating in iTunes. And if you have time, write a review. We'd really appreciate it. Also, we'd like to hear from you directly. So if you have any questions, comments, or ideas to share, you can email me at kluna@apa.org. That's KLUNA@apa.org. Speaking of Psychology is part of the APA Podcast Network, which includes the podcast APA Journals Dialogue about new psychological research and progress notes about the practice of psychology. You can find all our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also visit speakingofpsychology.org to listen to more episodes and to see resources on the topics we discuss. I'm Caitlin Luna with the American Psychological Association.